Welcome to the Salt of the Earth podcast. I am Thomas Pope, and this is my co-host,
Jonathan Cobb.
And today we're here to talk about stuff.
This is our second episode of the Salt of the Earth. I've already filmed one, so now we're on two.
Wow, that's math. So today we have a couple things to talk about. We're going to start by kind of going over the video that Jonathan made that should be coming out this week.
Yep. About the same time as this podcast, maybe a little bit before.
So you made a video on living the life of a disciple.
Yeah. I have the script out here so I can kind of go over what I talked about in that video. And Thomas hasn't watched it yet because I haven't even edited it as we speak. So he hasn't seen it at all.
I've read the script. So what's the basic synopsis of it though?
So the basic synopsis is trying to not let, for lack of a better phrase, pre-programmed ideas subconsciously take over our decision making, or trump our walk with God and decision making. Basically, that's the basic synopsis. So.
And you mentioned a lot of those ideas were things that are just like expected parts of life, like going to college, getting a good job, getting married, buying, these stereotypical American dream kind of things.
Yeah. I feel like a lot of those things are programmed into people and they don't even realize it. And we don't even stop to think about why we do these things. And I feel like there's even times in my own life where it has caused these pre-programmed ideas have caused me to have trumped my discipleship, or have caused me to make big decisions based off of those things rather than my walk with God.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. So thinking of like college, for instance, that's like a big one that's pretty relevant to both of us, just the ages we're at. Like, it's just this assumption that when you're done with high school, most people will go to college.
Especially if you're in like the middle class or above.
Or just anywhere.
Even
if you're in lower class, the idea is your goal is to get to go to college, like to do whatever you can to get there,
Yeah, it's like considered like the end all be all.
So it's kind of like just this assumption. So like when I got done with high school, I'd never thought about what I wanted to do in any way. So it was just I just kind of went with the assumption is like, okay, I'll just go to college.
Yeah.
4 years later.
And I went to college too while in high school, and I decided to drop out partly because of what I've talked about in this script. Because I made the decision to take PSEO under pressure to get my career in line at a very young age. And I feel like I didn't really think through that decision very well, and I didn't really consider it from a Christian perspective. And what I ended up deciding, and so I ended up dropping out of college in my second semester.
So I guess that's really the main thing we should be talking about. It's not like, oh, we felt pressured to do this thing or that thing. We should be talking about the reason why.
Yeah.
Why you think it's a good idea to reconsider.
Yeah, and as I go over it in the video and you see it, I very clearly say that I don't think any of these things are inherently bad, and I also say that I don't think any of these things are inherently good.
Mm-hmm.
Though some of them maybe more than others.
And you mentioned in the video that your primary kind of inspiration was looking at the life of Jesus and his disciples, and some of the things that he said, where it was very much the life of a disciple was fully devoted to being a disciple, to following Jesus. Mm-hmm. And while we can't physically follow behind him now, we can still fully devote our lives to being a disciple.
We can
And-
follow in the footsteps of what we can follow in his in his footsteps, even though he's a long way in front of us.
His metaphorical footsteps.
Yes, that's what I was trying to say.
Yeah. So the idea is that there are a lot of things that that can so very easily get in the way, and well, often they're kind of more. A lot of times we view them as like kind of the main goal, or at least they're the things we're thinking the most about, and then the discipling part is kind of like and also I should be doing this.
Yeah, and the problem is we don't think about it usually. It just kind of happens to us without us thinking about it. Like, no, I don't think the Christian youth, for example, like young kids in youth group, I don't think they're sitting there saying, my first priority is college and career, my second priority is my faith. I don't think they think that way. It just kind of happens, and the problem is they don't think about it.
Yeah, and I mean, yeah, that's a dangerous thing. Definitely is going through life thinking that faith is your number one priority when it's not. when your actions say otherwise, and that's something that I've realized multiple times. Is like, if I really looked at myself, here's what I'm saying, but here's what I'm doing, and they're not the same thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and obviously I'm not at all near being perfect in this, but I think the first step is to recognize that we can be influenced by culture and society and programming, and we don't even realize what we're doing.
Right. And I think that's kind of a major point you wanted to kind of get across in your video, I think, is you weren't necessarily offering like the solution necessarily. You were more asking a lot of questions and kind of saying like, why do we do this when, the Bible kind of indicates that we should be doing otherwise,
Mm-hmm.
So you asked a lot of questions like, why should I just, go to college? Why should I get a good job? These kind of things. You ask these kind of questions and you're just kind of trying to drill at the point. Is like, you're thinking about it, You don't necessarily know the answer. I mean, I've had a lot of similar questions myself recently, and do I know the answer yet? I'm still working on it, but it's something that we have to all be thinking about and working on, because when it comes right down to it, whether we ask ourselves and think about the reasons we're living our life or not, God will be thinking about it because he does see that. Mm-hmm. So we have to look inside ourselves as well.
Yeah. So I think awareness is the first step. And probably all of us have heard of Matthew 18 through 22. And I kind of took a little bit of a different spin on the second part of it. You want to read that passage?
Sure. So when Jesus saw the crowd around him, he gave orders to cross to the other side of the lake. Then a teacher of the law came to him and said, "Teacher, I will follow you wherever you go." Jesus replied, "Foxes have dens and birds have nests, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head." Another disciple said to him, "Lord, first let me go bury my father." But Jesus told him, "Follow me, and let the dead bury their own dead."
Yeah. And so I think the first person you interacted with is basically the story of life isn't going to be easy following Jesus. We've heard this before, and
mm-hmm.
that's the first point. And the second point, I think, is more about a lot of people have argued that when he said, "Lord, let me first go bury my father," he was not talking about actually like digging a hole. I think a lot of people have argued that he was talking about waiting. His father is like on his deathbed or something.
Yeah,
but
kind of wait around until your father dies.
But anyway, irregardless, I feel like it was very much of a societal norm and cultural obligation for him to do that. And
it's also probably just what he wanted to do,
Yeah, it was multiple things. His family is important to him, obviously, which is a good thing. It's cultural norm and societal norm, cultural and societal norm. And so Jesus was saying, basically how I see it is Jesus was saying, you got to make sure you don't let even let family traditions or societal norms get in the way of following me.
Mm-hmm.
And even those things can often be very good.
I think about I don't know the verse, and I'm going to be doing a massive paraphrase here. But if anyone who does not hate their own father and mother, or brother and sister, the idea, not actual hate, but that's just how it's worded. Basically, the idea is you have to be willing to give up anything.
Yeah, and I think these two verses connect very well because, if we can't even let our family get in the way of following Christ, and I think the verse you just said that's the main message that it's trying to get across.
Mm-hmm. It goes along with, well, I mean, and the first guy who walks up to Jesus, Jesus' response is, that basically if he does it, he's not going to have a comfortable place to lay his head. He's saying he's going to have to give up a lot of the comforts that he's more used to if he wasn't following Jesus. So it's that same kind of idea of you have to be willing to give things up.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, and so the first guy, Jesus was saying that he would have to give up things for himself, and the second guy, which might even be harder, is he was saying that he had to give up his family obligations. And so one guy could be like, okay, I can deal with loss for myself or discomfort for myself, but then even possibly even harder than that is dealing with the idea of not being there for your family. And so I think those are two different things, and so we have to both be okay with loss or discomfort for ourselves and neglect and going against traditions or family structure, or
we have to be willing to do something that isn't necessarily going to be pleasing to everyone around us.
Yeah, it's not only going to hurt ourselves, it might hurt other people too.
Well, like nowadays, I can say for certain, like if say semi-distant family member died or something, my mom would be pressuring me to go go to the funeral or something. Mm-hmm. And even if maybe I had something better to do, which I probably don't, the pressure would be there, or you get that kind of idea where, it doesn't really matter what you're doing. Like, you're kind of expected to do certain things, and if you don't, then it's because you're, I don't know, selfish or heartless or something.
Yeah, and
which most of the time we maybe are.
And you maybe are, but on the other hand, if there's a conflict between something you think God has called you to do and going to, say, a family member's funeral, then that's where this verse would come into play.
Mm-hmm. A really great point you made was that from a young age, from when you're a teen, when you're 16, when you're even younger, a lot of times, is people all around us are asking us questions like, what do you want to be when you grow up? What do you want to go to college for? What do you want to do? What kind of hobbies are you pursuing? And especially once you get older, it's like, what skills are you developing? How are you learning still? But we're so rarely asked the question or pressured with, how are you going to minister? What's your mission field going to be?
Mm-hmm.
How are you going to serve God? And I think, starting from a young age, that's what we should be pressuring a lot more.
Yeah.
And so I thought that was a really great point, is just, again, we can live as Christians and have, perfectly clear consciences that we're doing, what we're supposed to as Christians, but then we, pressure our kids and stuff to what they're going to do as far as career goes, much more than as far as Christ goes.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of, it's backwards.
So yeah, that's the point I was trying to make, is we don't even think about it. We just kind of do it. But if we stopped and think about it, we really should be making sure that for every time we try to talk about our kid's career, which I don't have a kid, and you almost do, we should doubly make sure that we're talking about what they're going to do to serve Christ, or even more than doubly. The math doesn't matter, but
well, I can definitely say for myself that if I'd grown up with that shift in perspective, that different way of looking at everything, as in growing up is not a matter of, oh, well, I'll get done with school and then either I'll do more school or I'll go get a job. Growing up is a matter of like, okay, the end goal is not a job, it's not school, it's God's kingdom.
Mm-hmm.
And what am I doing now to prepare for what I'm going to do later, or what I'm even doing now already, that if that focus had been there growing up,
you could be somewhere else.
I could be somewhere completely different.
Yeah, it can be hard to make the right priorities of ministry versus career when you have people in your life that are constantly pressuring you to think about your career and get things figured out, and what is your next steps? How are you progressing? It's like, and then they'll never, for one reason or the other, they'll never ask you about the other side of it. And so I think there's two things we got out of that. We need to realize that that's going on, and we need to be able to work through that and not let those people influence us to the point where we don't let those people influence us to the point where our priorities do flip. And also we need to make sure that when we're acting with other people, that we ourselves don't do that. We don't, which
fall into those same patterns
of talk, like if it's a young person that we know and starting a conversation with them instead of starting with, so how's your job search going or something like that. You can start with, how have you been ministering lately, or something like that.
Or here's something my dad would sometimes ask at like rallies and stuff. It'd be like, what's something interesting that you found in the Bible recently, or have you discovered anything? Just asking spiritual questions about people, because I know just in general, but even anyone, but also Christian circles, things you get asked like when you're first meeting something is like, what do you do? Meaning, what's your job?
Yeah.
Or what are you going to school for? Or things like that. And or how has work been the last week? Stuff like that. Mm-hmm. Those are the kind of questions we ask, and right away that conversation is just kind of shallow small talk.
Yeah, so it goes to our career side, our worldly side.
So I guess the end goal is, we can talk about it, we can admit it's a problem, but we have to now think about like what we can do to start changing that, starting with ourselves. And so the start of that is like, well, for one, maybe don't start conversations with those kind of questions. You know, maybe instead of asking someone how their week was or how are you, which is a terrible greeting, maybe ask, something even just a little bit spiritually minded, like, I'm drawing a blank for an example.
Because, a lot of the people that I hang out with, or we have for dinner or something, a lot of them are also Christians. It's not like so most of the people that I interact with on like a just hanging out kind of level are also Christians. So why don't you talk about those things more? Why isn't that the first conversation starter?
Well, that's the thing is even when you're around pretty much only Christians, how often does the conversation actually go towards something spiritual? And I think as a result of that, we, even as adults or children, we just don't know how to have spiritual conversations because, we maybe get into our late teens or something and we've like had a couple of them, a couple where, our parents weren't part of them as well or something, or maybe the only ones we've had have been as part of, Sunday school or youth group or something like that, where it was that setting and where questions were being asked. But we don't know how to just have spiritual conversations in just a normal everyday setting. And that's damaging, I think.
Yeah, it's something that we need. It's very important, and I think it's almost like there's a level of timidness to start a spiritual conversation, and I think that'll only go away with confidence, I guess. For me, it's helped that I've had a spiritual mentor for a while, and so I've had a lot of spiritual conversations with him, so that I've just kind of gotten used to that.
A lot of people don't have that.
Yeah. And so another thing that induces spiritual conversations is traumatic events or hard times. And we've had our share of those recently too, so that has also helped to start those conversations. So
sometimes a benefit, sometimes a bad thing happens and it leads to good things. Well, that's usually how it is, actually.
Yeah. It leads to us being able to talk about things better. Or it could go the opposite direction and you stop talking at all, but
it's not good.
So
yeah, in the end, and this is something I've been thinking a lot about recently, is it's very easy to talk about things, mention all the things that are wrong with the world or the church or ourselves. But then in the end we have to, challenge ourselves and make a commitment to doing something. And for me, this is kind of a personal goal that I'm trying to work towards, is just have a slightly higher percentage of spiritual conversations, or instead of saying, have a good day, see you soon, maybe, end with a more, I don't know,
Maranatha.
spiritual-minded goodbye, like, have a blessed day, something like that, which, you hear that, or God bless you, or things like that. You think of that and it's like, that's a weird thing for me to say. It's because we don't say those kind of things ever.
Yeah, it's actually, it's not any weirder than anything else we could say.
No, it's not, and it's, if saying that one thing could get someone to, and maybe think about it.
Double take?
Yeah, it's worth it, and so that's kind of that's one way, is just challenge ourselves to, to kind of skip the pre-programmed small talk and responses and say something real.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it just be aware of how you're making decisions and why you're making them, because a lot of us I fell into this trap, and I'm sure many people have also, is to make decisions based off of ideals that may not be our number one priority. And we don't even think about it because they're programmed into us. Mm-hmm. Because of where we live, our society, our family, our tradition, everything. It's just, well, yeah.
And really, and I'm sure going forward we'll probably have a lot more to say about this kind of thing, a lot more videos probably on the topic of, fully devoting our lives to God, living as a disciple, what that means, what that looks like, how we can do it. Because when it comes right down to it, that's kind of the whole point of this channel, is living lives that are more fully focused on God and not just on everything that's not God.
Yeah. I actually, if we want to, quickly, going back to my personal story connected with this video, so I was doing PSEO, I was going to be an electrician, I was going to get this great job, I was going to make plenty of money, and I would most likely be tied down to the job for the rest of my life, because that's the type of job that is. Once you get in, you can't get out. unless you, well, it's very hard. And,
right.
And I knew from the beginning that wasn't what I wanted to do, but because of the pressure around me, and I'm not just from others, also from myself to get something figured out, I ended up doing that. Unfortunately, I kind of got pushed over the edge and changed my mind like 2 semesters into it and dropped out, partly because and I wasn't really thinking about it on this level at that time, but partly just because of I realized what kind of culture I was going into. And also, another thing is, I realized that I was endangering locking away my life. Or at least going into down a slope that'd be very hard to get off of. And going down a path that'd be very hard to get off of. And I'm not saying that that job would have been bad. I'm just saying that I didn't want to do that. I wanted to leave my life open for more spiritual calling. So now I don't, obviously, I'm going to be honest, I don't know what I'm going to do with my life. And what I'm working towards is being able to say that, because I haven't been able to say that for a while. Most of the time I just say, well, I'll do this or that, and I'm working on it.
And I think, yeah, that's an important thing to be able to do, is just, hopefully everyone else kind of just backs off for a moment, and so you're just allowed to say, I don't know what I'm going to do with my life. I'm figuring it out. Sometimes that's what we need. We just need a little bit of a moment to figure it out.
But the caveat is, I know it's going to be in ministry. I've already figured that part out. And I kind of have several solid ideas that may happen, but I'm kind of waiting for a little bit more of a push from God, I guess. And also, right now I'm kind of in the wait stage. And also kind of the fundraising stage, because one of the ideas I have will require a lot of money. So I'm leaving myself open for opportunities God may give me, and I have several ideas that may or may not work out. But regardless, I'm leaving myself open. So I'm not totally directionless, but I'm not closing myself off at the same time.
Right. And at least the general direction you're going in is the right one, right?
Yeah.
You're trying to find, you don't have to know a specific thing, but generally kind of what you want to do, and it's related to ministry, and that's how it kind of should be almost. This is the thing I've been thinking about a lot recently, is like, pick any subject of life, whether it be what job you get, or where you live, or your political views. And I hadn't even really looked at it till not too long ago for some reason, but like, those should all be based on your beliefs as a Christian. Like, for some reason that didn't appeal, like, I thought of like, political views, who you vote for, that's based on like, I don't know, what you think is best for the economy and for the country and things like this. And it's like, but thinking about it, it's like, well, hold on, that's not why I should be making any decisions like this. Or like, where you work, it should not be based on necessarily just what you want to do, or you should be thinking first, okay, how can I serve God in this? Is this something that I can actually do that in? Because if it's not, maybe it's not the right thing.
Yeah. And I think right now we're both working in a job that we're not planning on making into careers, but we're doing it for money, obviously. And I don't think that's a bad thing. But they also, neither of our jobs, the upside is that neither of our jobs are something that we can turn into careers, or that we want to. So that's the upside to that. So we probably won't get stuck, or at least I hope not. We shouldn't stay here.
There's always time for a midlife crisis.
It's always, yeah. But so neither of us have set paths yet, really. Though you're a little bit farther along than I am, but
so this really reminds me of a lot of things that Paul wrote of, and like how, well, he was like a tent maker, right? That's what he did, but as much as possible he tried not to have to do that. He wanted to rely on support from Christians so that he could spend his time preaching, because he was an evangelist. He traveled around. That's what his main focus in life was, and he only made tents when there was really no other option. So it's not a bad thing to work.
Yeah,
having a job for money, that's the purpose of money, so you can stay alive. When you really think about it, you're doing it to stay alive, and hopefully also to give back to other people.
Yeah.
So doing that is fine as long as you're not living for work, you know.
Your work is supporting your life, and your life is supporting your ministry.
And your life is not your work.
Yeah.
Or on a similar note, kind of some of the other things you mentioned, getting away from careers is, you know, Paul wrote like about getting married is like, you know, if you don't feel like you have to get married, then don't devote your whole, you know, you'll have more time to devote for to serving Christ.
Mm-hmm.
And really that's not an idea that a lot of us think about, because to a lot of us we're not actually devoting enough of our life to where it makes that much of a difference, right? Like whether we're married or not, we're kind of giving the same level. Is maybe something's wrong there.
Yeah. Maybe. Yeah.
Maybe we should be spending more of our life, you know, living for Christ and
not wasting any second. Yeah.
Maybe food for thought.
Yeah, and also another interesting thing about that verse is the way he says it makes you believe. So he says it's good not to get married, but it's also good to get married if that's your path. And so that's kind of how I decided, why I think that marriage is something that is not inherently good, but it's not inherently bad because of the way Paul said it.
Well, so if you take his arguments of like, you know, it's better not to get married because then you'll be able to serve the Lord more, that really is only applicable if you would actually devote that time that you have because you're not married
to serve
to
the
God.
Lord.
If not, if you're just going to devote it to yourself, then it doesn't actually matter.
Yeah.
So his whole argument, or if getting married you're not going to give any less time, then so the whole argument depends on this idea that you are actually devoted enough to where you would be constrained by getting married, I guess.
Yeah. And I think for some people, marriage could be, for some types of ministry, marriage can be a constraint, and for other types of ministry, it could be a boost. But so I think as Christians, I guess if we're going to be, well, first off, we should devote our whole lives to Christ. And if marriage gets in the way of that, we should, I guess, not get married, I guess. So.
I guess so. Unless like he said, you know.
You have to, because of certain reasons.
Because of lust and all that fun stuff.
Yeah.
Better not to do that.
Better not to sin and get married than to sin and not get married.
Right. Okay, so quite a long conversation on that. Definitely applicable to people who haven't gone to college or anything yet.
Yeah.
But really applicable.
It's never too late to drop out.
Anyone. Never too late to drop out.
Well, unless you graduated. But anyway.
You can decide not to go for that second degree. So another thing I guess we were going to talk about is you know, we've talked a lot now about life and how we can live it for God, but we have to always keep in mind the end goal, the why of why would we even want to serve God, you know? And the clearest, I guess the easiest answer that can be given for that would be heaven. Mm-hmm. Because heaven.
Yeah.
And
also eternal lake of fire.
The push-pull, I want this good thing, I do not want this bad thing.
Yes.
It's a double motivator. So I'm going to read a passage from 2 Peter chapter 3 because it's just a great passage. Okay, so I want to read this passage from 2 Peter chapter 3, so it's verses 10 through 18. But the day of the Lord will come like a thief, in which the heavens will pass away with a roar, and the elements will be destroyed with intense heat, and the earth and its works will be burned up. Since all these things are to be destroyed in this way, what sort of people ought you to be in holy conduct and godliness, looking for and hastening the coming of the day of God, because of which the heavens will be destroyed by burning, and the elements will melt with intense heat. But according to his promise, we are looking for new heavens and a new earth in which righteousness dwells. So I guess before going any further, this connects very well with what we were talking about recently, because here Peter gives this picture of the end, basically, of everything just burning up and just melting, the entire universe melting.
It's right out of a disaster movie.
Right. And then verse 11, since all these things are going to be destroyed in this way, what sort of people ought you to be in holy conduct and godliness? So that it's a very down-to-earth question of, okay, you know this is going to happen. How should this change your behavior?
Yeah. It's... Mm-hmm.
So if we think of it that way, and we know that eventually this, everything that we know is temporary and it's going to come to an end, right?
It reminds me of a great quote.
What is this great quote?
So basically, there's this one show I watched, and one of the and everything's going horribly wrong for the characters, and so one of the characters gives this pep talk, and he was sounding all positive and cheerful, and he's listing all these horrible things that were happening. But at the end, he's like, "But it's okay, because we all die one day."
Because we all die one day.
So, when you think about all the horrible things that happen here on Earth, you can realize it's okay, because someday it's all going to be burned up in a fire.
But given that knowledge, we have to ask ourselves, how should that knowledge affect how we live, right?
Yeah. If we live in the light that we could die tomorrow, we may not be so concerned about some things and more concerned about other things. Or we could die in 10 years, but still, either way.
We need to be thinking about it now. And in verse 13, but according to his promise, we are looking for new heavens and a new earth in which righteousness dwells. So it's kind of saying that all these things are going to end, but here's what we should be looking forward to. Continuing on, therefore, beloved, since you look for these things, be diligent to be found by him in peace, spotless and blameless, and regard the patience of the Lord as salvation. Just as also our beloved brother Paul, according to the wisdom given to him, wrote to you, as also in all his letters, speaking in them of these things, in which are some hard things to understand, which the untaught and unstable distort, as they do the rest of the Scriptures, to their own destruction. You therefore, beloved, knowing this beforehand, be on your guard, so that you are not carried away by the error of unprincipled men and fall from your own steadfastness, but grow in the grace and knowledge of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. To him be the glory both now and to the day of eternity. Amen. So there kind of Peter reiterates and asks the question again. You therefore, knowing this beforehand, and he kind of gives us kind of a guidebook for what we should be doing. We should be diligent to be found in peace, spotless and blameless, to grow in grace and knowledge of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. So I just really like these verses because it's kind of like it's a guidebook for how we should be living because of the situation if we're in. If we really zoom out and look at it big picture, which we should be doing, what we're doing right now is not just kind of in a vacuum. We're not just choosing our own paths in a vacuum. It's all leading to something that affects us and affects everyone. It's just a great passage.
Yeah, it's good to have some good reminder of the fire that is coming. As it burns away all the evil in the world, and it leaves only... So all the horrible things that happen are going to be burned away, all the things but if you put hope in your world and you store up a bunch of wealth on this earth, that's also going to be burned away. Everything's going to be burned away. You're going to rot in your grave.
Wow, that's pessimistic, but entirely true.
Well, you could think about it as optimistic.
Not pessimistic, it's maybe depressing, but true.
Yeah, but sometimes you can find depressing things to be good for your it can be uplifting sometimes.
Well, I think that's what this passage kind of should be. Is it should be a reality check. It's like, okay, are you living like you believe that this is going to happen? Like, you might say you believe in heaven and hell. Are you living like it? If I ask myself that, then the answer isn't very good all the time. Because I can't always say yes. I know that I'm 100% ready for this. And I think we probably should be able to say that at least most of the time.
Yeah, yeah. I something that I struggle with is the confidence. So that's something I need to work on more. Is to think about that bit more, figure out.
And if we're in a situation where we're not confident for whatever reason, then the natural thing, the thing we should be doing, which we don't always do, is trying to fix it, and so we can get to that spot. But we're not always very diligent in doing that. Speaking for myself, as I can often recognize, like, here's something I really need to be doing because it's very important and I need to do it, or I need to not do it maybe. But then time goes on. It hasn't changed what I actually did, and so like the natural response should be to fix it, right? But we as humans aren't always logical like that, or self-disciplined like that, maybe. So another thing I wanted to look at, Second Peter gives its little blurb about the end, basically. But there's another really great section in Revelation that gives this picture of heaven, and so we've kind of seen, here's what we were wanting to avoid, the destruction of everything that we know, right? But what are we working toward? So Revelation 20...
I can read that.
I don't know if I... No, okay. So Revelation 21, actually. And then start with verses 1 through 4.
Okay. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth. For the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and there was no longer any sea. I saw the holy city, the New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride, beautifully dressed for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, "Look, God's dwelling place is now among the people, and he will dwell with them. They will be his people, and God himself will be with them and be their God. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death, or mourning, or crying, or pain, for the old order of things has passed away."
And then just in the next verse he says, "And he who sits on the throne said, 'Behold, I am making all things new.'" And so here we start to kind of form this picture of, so everything's destroyed, but then everything is new. We have a new heaven, a new earth, and everything's pretty good, Everything's pretty peachy, God's dwelling among his people. There's no death, there's no tears, there's all these bad things have been removed.
Whenever I think about all the pain or the evil in this world, it's, instead of thinking about it's nice that instead of thinking about how it can be fixed or how it can be vanquished, I think about the fact that this is not the end all. The end all is perfect for those who get there. Because if you try to think about how you can make this world perfect, it's impossible, because Satan is the prince of this world. And so it's just a real comfort to know that though this world is not perfect, that's okay.
Something else is waiting.
Something else is perfect, and for those who go there, it will be perfect.
Right.
And that's just a huge comforting thing, because if it weren't for that, it could be very depressing to think about the fact that this world that we have is horrible. Think about it.
And without God, it's just kind of all meaningless.
Yeah. Because if I wasn't a Christian, if I didn't believe in heaven, I would be like, this world is horrible. How do I? And there seems to be no way to make it good. There seems to be nothing perfect in this world. There's no perfect person that you can put your trust in. There's no perfect organization. There's no perfect land. There's nothing perfect in this world. But there is something that is perfect.
Mm-hmm.
That's not in this world.
And going on in later in chapter 21, there's a description of what heaven is like, and whether heaven actually ends up being like this or not, I would say doesn't really matter. This could all just be symbolic or something, but it's a symbol. If it is a symbol, it's meant to stand for something that's greater than itself, right? So we read, which we're going to read here, the description of what heaven is like, this, New Jerusalem and all this. And it's this grand, amazing thing. And, whether or not that's exactly how it is, we can know that it's going to be pretty good. And I recommend everyone just read through chapter, 21 and 22 of Revelation. So here, do you want to start reading in verse 10 and just kind of go a few verses at a time?
10 or 22? 21?
Yeah, 21.
And he carried me away in the spirit to a mountain great and high, and showed me the holy city, Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God. It shone with the glory of God, and its brilliance was like a very precious jewel, like a jasper, clear as crystal. It had a great high walls with 12 gates, and on the gates were written the names of the 12 tribes of Israel. There were 3 gates to the east, 3 on the north, 3 on the south, and 3 on the west. The wall of the city had 12 foundations, and on them were the names of the 12 apostles of the Lamb.
It's just always a thing to think about,
Yeah.
Picturing what it would be like. What's it like to die, What's it like to, at that moment, go one of two places, I don't know.
Yeah.
There's something we can't say. We don't know the answer. We can speculate.
This is one of the areas where it's only faith. Or, some people would argue with that, but a lot of people argue with, one person in particular.
Well, yeah, it's more or less speculation, though.
Yeah.
What heaven is like, what death is exactly is like, those kind of things are just kind of sealed up for us at this time,
Yeah, at least. So, yeah, but you can take comfort in the fact that it doesn't matter.
What does matter is how we live.
It does matter is if we get there or not.
Right, and working towards that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, heaven does matter. I'm saying, how death works. It doesn't affect.
Well, yeah, the specifics of how it works, or what particular gem New Jerusalem looks like, maybe it isn't as super relevant to us right now.
Yeah.
What does matter is
how
we live our lives, and that. Then we'll figure it out when we get there, and it'll probably be great. I have no doubt in that.
Mm-hmm. And we'll be with God, so that'll be
It's nice. I always like. I don't know where or if, but sometimes going to heaven is compared to, or it's metaphorically referred to as rest or sleep.
Well, because I feel like this Earth is a struggle. It's a constant battle, and God, just like God rested on the 7th day after creating the world, He has prepared a rest for us. And Yeah, I, I think it's comforting to think of this world as a constant struggle, because that way you, by comparison, heaven is going to be perfect rest.
And I know definitely it's something I thought of a couple times recently is when like I'm super stressed out or something and I'm busy and I'm tired. The idea of just sleeping at last, like rest at last, like that eternal rest, it just sounds so inviting because I just kind of picture just all the weight, all the stress, all the soreness or whatever just kind of falling off of me and
Yeah.
just resting.
For me, it's more like when, if I've really been hurt by somebody, or I've been in a situation where I just reminded again of how evil this world is. That's when I really can start taking comfort in the thought of heavenly rest, because nobody up there is going to hurt you. Nobody's going to betray you.
It's just definitely easy sometimes to relate to Paul, and he got to the point where he was wanting he was wanting to maybe just be dead and to be with God, but at the same time he knew there was still so much more that he could do here on earth. So I relate with that sometimes, where it's just like, can't it just be now?
Yeah.
But obviously there's still more that we need to do.
So the other topic that I thought I could surprise on Thomas, that I've never talked to him about this before.
Fun. Bring it on.
And I don't have this prerequisite. This saying, I don't have an answer for this. I just have several opinions that you can take with a grain of salt, because I haven't really studied this, but I do have opinions.
Okay.
So
bring on your opinions.
So
I'll tell you your.
The question is, what role should politics play in a Christian's life? Now, last voting season, I became caught in a mindset of constantly thinking about politics, and basically afterwards I was like, it would have been better for me not to have voted and just ignored it completely, considering how much it took over my mind for like a month. And so I started to think about it. I've contemplated several times since then if I should ever vote again, like ever. Like, is it worth it for me to vote at all if it's going to, if I'm going to start, if it's going to influence my thinking to be more worldly, I guess is how I should say it. Because politics isn't a thing of this world, and if it...
Well, you can't look at that you could take that to an extent and say nothing is of this world, so I just shouldn't care about anything worldly, but definitely it's a thing to struggle with, is like how involved to get or just to ignore it entirely. And I mean, it's kind of a hard thing to say, because you can't just look at the Bible and be like, here's what they did in a biblical democracy, because it was a completely different structure back then,
Yeah.
But yeah.
But one another thing I've thought about with this is, okay, say, here's a question for you. If we were Christians right now, if we were Christians during the time, and we had a church kind of like our church we have now, during the time of the Revolutionary War, what side do you think we would have been on?
That's a tough question, because it's a war that largely was, it was over freedom and whatnot, but...
Yeah, but at the same time, well, there's a lot of different factors at play, and obviously I'm not going to say that I think that the Founding Fathers did anything wrong. I'm not going to say that. I don't know. And I think God wanted that. I'm sure that it was part of God's plan.
Right.
But if we were to undergo something like that right now, A, what side would we be on? Or B, would we you think it would be the Christian thing to do to act as a third party, or to not be involved in it and try to be a
Conscientious objector.
conscientious
Watch him try to say it.
not involved,
To not fight.
to be not involved in a fighting way, but to be like the sideless medics, and be a refuge for whoever asks.
It's a difficult thing to. You can't just have a blanket answer and say.
You can't, and I don't have no idea what the answer would be to this, but I think it's a interesting thing to think about, as if the politics ever came to a place where it was, you had to be, let's say, politics could come to a place where I think it would be hard for a Christian to be involved if it started to involve more violence or whatnot. I think it's something that you should consider, is that if any Christian, if politics gets more heated, there probably is a point where we should start to withdraw.
I mean, that's definitely a good thing to think about, because, looking at the Revolutionary War as an example, is like, it wasn't really a revolution made for spiritual reasons mostly. I mean, people came to America for religious freedom, but, what was the revolution about? Tea tax?
That was a straw that broke the camel's back.
Stuff like that, where it's like they just wanted freedom, or like nowadays, it's like, choosing one candidate over another or something like that. Like,
yeah, there's definitely things that is religious about certain candidates' agendas and policies, but for the most part, it's not that heavily intertwined with the Bible. So it's.
I mean, I kind of always wish there would just be like a, really strong, like a really faithful, believing candidate of some kind, or politician or something like that. But those don't come around very often.
Here's why I have a theory about that. Do you think if somebody fully devoted their lives to Christ, would they have time to go into politics? Politics is a very time-consuming occupation.
It depends on in what way they're devoted, because maybe their devotion, their calling is, I want to become a believing politician, and I want to bring about change from that. So maybe I want to become the first. Well, not the first. I want to become a strong Christian senator or president or governor or something like that, because then I would be able to lead from that position. I would be able to have my faith kind of affect a much broader range than I could otherwise.
Yeah.
So I guess with a lot of this stuff, it's not a clear-cut answer like it's wrong to get into politics. We have to, it's our duty. I think when we think of it like that, then that's also wrong. It's kind of a case-by-case, like, well, you can read the Bible, you can know what it says. What do you think is best for you? And I'm not saying we each have our own little, like, personal truth or something. I'm saying we kind of just have to make the decision for ourselves.
Yeah. But, I think it's just, it can be the mindset that as Christians our duty is to vote, I think can be dangerous, because I think it kind of undermines the fact that our home is not in this earth. To think about it that way. And I definitely know people that think like that.
Mm-hmm.
Is that should we, as Christians, how could we stand by and let somebody has all these issues take office?
Well, an important thing to think about is, Paul wrote in Romans is, you know, any authority figure, any one in power was given that power and authority by God.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's kind of difficult to think of, but, you know, here in America we have a democracy, well, a republic democracy or whatever.
Yeah.
We vote, but in the end, God is really the one who's deciding who gets in, you know, and
Yeah, God has a plan, and whether the plan is to make life better or make life worse, it's he's still in control.
And so I guess, I mean, as far as I can say, just kind of my take on it, my perspective is, as far as like voting or political involvement goes, is it's just kind of a matter of like, we should be thinking of, you know, our duty as Christians first, and we should be making any decisions that we make in light of that.
Mm-hmm.
We should not be thinking of solely like, okay, you know, I think this guy's going to do great for the economy, or I think this guy's terrible. And we shouldn't just be thinking of it that way. And I know in college I had some friends who were like that, and at first it was really like, it was just really a weird thing, because they'd be like saying like, oh man, I really hate this candidate because of this reason, because you know, it would make it a lot harder to witness to people because of this. And I was like, that's just kind of silly. But then as I thought more about it, it's like, well, you know, they were making their decision based on their beliefs. What am I making my decision based off? It's based off of all this, you know, things I hear from my parents, things I hear from other people, you know, my belief about what is good for America, whatever that means.
Yeah, and that's the other side of it too. Is if you have a strong belief in politics, that could get in the way of ministering to people that don't agree with you in politics. And so I think that's another area that we really have to be careful, because some people have very, very strong feelings about certain political issues or political candidates.
And you should not let the color of the person's tie get in the way of seeing them as a person and as a child of God, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or basically what I'm saying is political leanings, you know, don't let that be the thing that prevents you from potentially, you know, reaching out to them.
Yeah, showing love for them or whatever. And don't let that alienate them from you.
Because this may sound weird, and some of you may think this is wrong or weird or something, but God does not have a political party. There is not one party that is morally good and another that is morally bad.
Yeah.
God is not a donkey or an elephant or anything else. And it's important for us to kind of think of it that way, because, well,
it can be easy to associate one party with Christian and one party with anti-Christian. It can be easy to think that way. And
I've heard people do it on each side.
Yeah, and when it happens on both sides, you start to think, so half the Christians think this party is pro-Christian, and half the Christians think this other party is pro-Christian. And like, how does this work? Somebody must be wrong.
Somebody's wrong, or everyone's wrong.
I'm leaning more towards the fact that everyone's wrong.
So yeah, I guess if I were to say anything, it'd just always be, make your decision based on your faith. And this is something that, you know, up till a few months ago, I hadn't fully like realized this is like, you know, I think what I think not at all because of because of God. It's completely unrelated. Like, I have strong political views, but they're their own entity, and that's not how it should be.
Yeah. I think what I personally need to be careful about is not letting it distract me from higher things. To my first calling is not not get too engrossed with political controversies and stuff. It can be very distracting, and we can deceive ourselves into thinking that it's for a good cause, but if it distracts us from more important things, it's bad.
And that goes back to what we said earlier. We're talking earlier about conversations, is how many times have you been in a group of Christians or something, and they're very passionately arguing about this political issue or that one, or here's what's going to happen in the future, it's going to be terrible, they're going to take away this and that, and
yeah.
And then, but when do you hear them doing that about the gospel,
Mm-hmm.
about anything spiritual, you don't,
Yeah, that's true. We never have that type of passion for.
So it's just a thing to think about, maybe the focus isn't quite on point. And starting with ourselves, we have to be recognizing that and trying to change it.
Mm-hmm.
So, do you have any more thoughts?
I think that should about wrap us up.
So today we talked a lot about, we started talking about Jonathan's video, and it kind of got into a whole discussion of how we should, no matter what we're doing in life, our primary focus should be how we're going to minister, how we're going to live as disciples, and that we should not feel pressured to do all the physical things when we haven't even yet considered the spiritual things.
Yeah. And we also talked about how to not be socially awkward. No, we talked about how to start conversations.
I still haven't learned that one.
Yeah.
I haven't learned either of those.
We were both homeschooled, so.
And ended up talking a little bit about politics, which
It's always fun.
it's always fun.
Got very heated.
Got very heated. Anger every time. So I think that about wraps it up. I guess we'll have another one of these next week. We'll also hopefully have other videos before then. Hopefully.
Yep. So thanks for watching this Salt of the Earth podcast.
Thanks, and go be salty.